My son looked me straight in the eye, wearing his tuxedo, surrounded by wedding guests, and told me nobody wanted me there. For a moment, I thought the road had finally broken something in my brain. 20 hours behind the wheel will do strange things to a tired mind. But he said it again, slower this time, so there was no mistaking it. Nobody moved to stop him. Not his bride. Not her parents. Not one guest standing close enough to hear every word land on me like a hammer on cold steel. My name is Walter Briggs. I am 68 years old, a retired diesel mechanic from a small town in Ohio. And for most of my life I believed hard work and love were enough to hold a family together. That belief carried me through 42 years of grease-stained hands, through losing my wife Margaret to cancer, and through raising our only son, Caleb, alone. It carried me all the way to a stone-covered wedding venue outside Columbus, where I stood in a rented tuxedo holding my late wife's ring, listening to my boy tell me to leave. Margaret died when Caleb was 12, and the week before she passed she took my hand and made me promise one thing. She asked me to make sure our son always knew he was loved, no matter what life did to him later. I kept that promise the only way I knew how. I learned to braid his fishing line the way she used to. I sold my restored pickup truck to help pay his college tuition. I worked nights at a trucking company, so he never had to know how close we came to losing the house. I never wanted him to carry that weight. I only wanted him to fly higher than I ever had. Everything started shifting the year Caleb met Vanessa Whitfield, an accountant from a wealthy family who owned half the commercial buildings downtown. Her father, Gerald Whitfield, shook my hand at our first dinner with a smile that never touched his eyes. He called me the mechanic, like it was a title instead of a trade. Every conversation that night circled back to investments and country clubs, and every time I mentioned something ordinary, the table went quiet. Like my life was a stain nobody wanted to look at too closely. Over the following months, Caleb changed in small ways I tried to ignore. He answered fewer calls. Holiday visits shortened. He stopped mentioning old friends and started talking about networking, image, and success. As if the boy I raised had been quietly replaced by a stranger wearing his face. When I drove my dusty truck to help him move apartments, he looked embarrassed before I even climbed out. Vanessa watched from the balcony with an expression I recognized from junkyards, the look people give something they consider used up. Then the wedding invitation arrived, cream-colored paper with gold lettering and not a single handwritten word inside. Still, I told myself families go through rough seasons and weddings have a way of pulling everyone back together. So I packed a garment bag, a suitcase, and a small wooden box holding Margaret's wedding ring, the one she asked me to give to Caleb's wife someday. I drove 20 hours straight, parked my old truck among luxury cars that cost more than my house, and walked toward the entrance believing I was walking toward my son. Instead, I was met with rejection dressed up in a tuxedo. He told me to leave in front of everyone, and not one person defended me. I turned around, got back into my truck, and made it 3 miles down the highway before my hands started shaking so badly I had to pull over. Somewhere on that dark shoulder of the road, I finally admitted the truth to myself. That invitation had never been an invitation. It had been an obligation nobody wanted to honor. I thought that humiliation was the end of the story. But 2 days later my phone rang, and it was Caleb, sounding relaxed, as if nothing had happened. He told me the wedding cost over $40,000, and casually asked when I planned to send my share. I sat there in stunned silence, waiting for an apology that never came, only an invoice disguised as family loyalty. I asked him one simple question. If I had written a check for $20,000, would he have let me walk through those doors? He never answered, and his silence told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in his new life. I told him calmly that you do not send a bill to someone you threw out the front door, and I hung up the phone without anger, only clarity. For the first time in 25 years, I stopped chasing a relationship that clearly did not want to be caught. Word began spreading anyway, through cousins, neighbors, and even Vanessa's own sister Claire, who called me privately to say her family cared more about appearances than truth, and that Caleb had started believing he needed to earn his place by rejecting where he came from. Months passed. I rebuilt an old rocking chair someone left by the road, volunteered at the Veterans Center, and slowly rebuilt pieces of myself instead of waiting by the phone. Then one rainy Saturday in November, there was a knock at my door, and standing there soaked to the bone, without his polished suit or confident smile, was Caleb. He removed his cap, looked down at the porch floor, and said he did not think he had been a very good son. There was no excuse in his voice, only exhaustion and regret, and for the first time in months, I saw my boy again instead of the stranger he had become. We sat at the same kitchen table where he ate breakfast for 18 years, and he finally told me the truth. He admitted that the moment someone made him feel ashamed of where he came from, he chose their approval over defending me, and that silence slowly turned into shame, and shame slowly turned into cruelty. When I brought out his mother's wedding ring and told him I had carried it 20 hours only to bring it home unopened, he broke down completely, crying the way people cry when they finally see themselves without excuses. In the months that followed, healing did not arrive as one dramatic moment, but through small ordinary ones, pancake breakfasts at our old diner, quiet fishing trips at the lake, where he learned to cast a line as a boy, and slow honest conversations that replaced years of silence. He began setting boundaries with Vanessa's parents, and she started acknowledging her own silence that day outside the venue. None of it happened overnight, but it happened honestly, and that is usually enough. Looking back now, I understand that the greatest justice was never about revenge or punishment. It was about refusing to let someone else's worst moment turn me into a bitter man. Forgiveness never erased what happened that day, but it stopped yesterday from stealing every tomorrow we had left together. If this story reminded you of someone in your own life, do not wait for the perfect moment to have the conversation that could still save what is left. And if stories like this move you, share it with someone who needs it, and stay with Silent Justice Stories for more.